Hey everybody, this is Fengzu speaking, and we are at episode 97. So this episode, I'm going to be designing one of the topics I mentioned in episode, I think 95, one of those topics of form follows function. So I'll be doing the research ship. So let me open up the reference image here. But in this episode, because I'm doing a lot of rough sketches and so forth, and this time we have no 3D involved at all. It's just all pure hand done in Photoshop and some really bad photo bashing. I actually gonna speed this video up so you guys can see the process it took. In real time, this entire thing took about just under about 3 hours to put together. So right now I'm talking real time, obviously, but after this I'll move into fast forward mode so you can see what I did. So let me just open up all the images I produced for this episode. You can see what you are about to watch. So this is the reference from that past episode in which we said you could just show real world things as is. You don't have to design anything, just show as is because it's pretty cool. And hopefully this episode will demonstrate that. Let me open up the first image here. So later you'll see me putting these notes together of how to give yourself a plan when approaching these kind of projects. Give yourself a list, for example, over here. Let me switch to red here. Give yourself a list, give yourself some keywords, and then compile a couple keyframes for what you want compositionally. And after that, I also did a few comps, which you'll see here. So these 6 over here were done with really bad photo bashing. The point of these is just for yourself. They're not for clients or not for anybody, just for yourself. So you have an idea of what to do. And I'm not sure if I'll continue this in episode 98, in which we comp these out in 3D, like we actually build them out. These are not showable. They're too ugly, right? They're not showable. But we'll see. If I have time, we'll build them out like what we did in 96. So we flush them out in 3D and so forth. We'll see. If I don't have time, maybe we'll move on to a different subject matter since we have a few more to cover. So anyways, I'm going to move into the fast forward mode and see you guys there in the fast forward mode. All right, I'm going to sign off for this part for now. All right, so here we are in the fast forwarded part of the video. So this in real time took about 2 hours and 40 minutes. I sped it up by about 3.5x the original speed, and we are watching that now. So hopefully that is not too fast or not too slow, so we can get through all these images. First thing I'm doing now is writing all the steps or all the scenes that I want to do for this demo. I like to keep things with some kind of structure. I don't like to draw things without any kind of goal or any kind of deadline. So by having a list, it gives me a sort of a mental note of what I want to establish in this project. So even though this is a demonstration for Design Cinema, I still want to have a pipeline. So in this case, I wrote down about 9 scenes I think I'll need to tell the visual story of this. Now, it doesn't mean I have to do all 9, but at least I have an over idea of the amount of work I need to do, so I can better plan my time, better plan my setup. Because, for example, if you're going to give yourself, say, 2 images and you have a whole day, well, that's very different than giving yourself 10 images and you have a whole day. So for Design Cinema, I generally give myself about 4 hours to do these. So in 4 hours, I could generally do about 6 to 8 comps. So I give myself a goal of, say, 9. If I can hit 6, good enough, because that would be good enough for the demo. So first thing to do is write these notes down. And then on the right side, I wrote some keywords. For example, storm, darkness, windy, right, fog. These are just reminder words to kind of get my brain into the project, into the mood of it. So when I'm drawing, I can look at the words like storm and I sort of just mentally get into that zone. Okay, so now I'm framing out a couple of 2:3:5 ratios. Now these are not done precisely, it's kind of just film ratio shots. So I can start my comps. So these comps, as well as the paintings that I'll be doing later, all these, okay, and this is really important, all of them are for yourself. They're super crappy, they're super rough. Nobody sees these. These are not for directors or not for studio heads, just for yourself, right? So that way you have something to work off of. Because if you start off with the really precise drawings on your first sketch, you're going to find yourself stuck, possibly very, very early on. And these are things we find students doing. Like they get too caught up in the first initial drawing. They're trying to make the sketch nice, and they forgot about their design. They get really tired. So by the time they're done with the first sketch, they already are burned out brain-wise, So by keeping things rough, you can move through these ideas one after another, one after another. So in this case, by giving myself a goal of 9 sketches, or at least 8, you can see there on the list there, I want to hit these as fast as possible. only ideas. I don't care about the sketch, how good it is. So here I'm doing the establishing of a ship, right? And I don't want to change this ship design. The original one's good enough, right? Part of this demo is to take real world things and just show them as is. You don't need to redesign a ship from scratch. Use it. The only thing I did is maybe add a few antennas. As you can see, the notes I wrote there says add lots of antennas, right? To make it more like even more science-based or something. And then as soon as I got enough information in that boat, I move on to the next one, which is the bridge, right? So the whole point is don't get bogged down early. Explore these ideas, because sometimes the good ideas comes in the middle of production. Right? Sometimes it comes in the first one, sometimes it comes in the last one. But if you only have one drawing you're working off, your brain doesn't have the capacity or doesn't have the room to kind of think outside the context that we're working on now. So my experience, my work flow is to just go through a bunch of things at the same time. If you follow me in Design Cinema long enough, you see that I like to always start with 2 or 3 different comps at the same time on the same canvas. I don't even break them up into different pieces. So that way I'm seeing multiple things happening at the same time. I could go up and down. For example, I see something wrong with the ship. I could go up and fix it. I could go back to this bridge shot and draw it. So in this case, no perspective. Everything's eyeball. I don't even put a perspective grid on there. It's nothing. These are all for myself. And if I'm working with a team, these sketches are good enough for other artists to understand. That's the good thing about working within our own circle, right? If you're working with other designers, art directors, and so forth, yeah, they're showable. That's fine, because we can all read these drawings. At least this is better than a stick figure sketch, right? At least we can understand it. But they're not good enough for clients. So take that equation out while you're drawing these, so that way you just totally relax, get yourself a coffee, get your whatever favorite drinks, sit down and just sketch. Just know that nobody will see these, right? And for me to put these out there, you guys are seeing basically the rawest form of my drawings. So sometimes designers are kind of afraid to do that. It's like, oh, I don't want people to see my bad stuff. But in my case, I don't care. It's like, look at this stuff, man. This stuff is crappy. But this is how we do things. I don't want to just show you the final images and go, oh, look what I did. And that, when we're teaching students, that really is it's almost kind of it could hurt their potential of growth, because they're seeing only the final result. They're not seeing the failures. They're not seeing the bad drawings. They're not seeing, like, for a professional, we go through the same things everybody goes through. No matter how pro you are, we still got to start somewhere, right? You got to start with a rough sketch. So you guys are seeing everything that's just totally raw. And if you're doing this, if you're training at home, give it a try. A rough sketch doesn't have to be tight. It doesn't have to be all nice. It's not for your sketchbook, right? And I mentioned that numerous times in the past Design Cinemas. So back to these sketches here. So now I did a bridge and I did an ROV room, kind of like the room where they control those deep sea diving subs. So quickly about the story, so you guys can see what I thought of this when I was drawing these. For myself, I've always been fascinated with ancient civilizations, especially the monolithic civilizations. If you're not too familiar with this kind of stuff, just look up like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, these guys. Type in Joe Rogan on YouTube. They've been very popular in the past 5 years talking about this stuff. And I've been liking this stuff since I was a tiny little kid, in which you look at some of the things like the Egyptian pyramids and look at the Peruvian Machu Picchu, right? There's a huge difference between what's built there and what a different architecture was built earlier. Huge difference. As a designer, you could see that. So I was in Egypt earlier last year, and if you go to the temple next to the Sphinx, you could totally tell somebody else built the enclosure next to the Sphinx, and then the Egyptians came along and built the stuff afterwards. It's completely different style, completely different proportions, completely different methods of building. And these monolithic structures are generally just giant stones cut perfectly, they align perfectly, and they're built really strangely. They don't stack stones like how, for example, how we stack stones today, which is one on top of each other. They actually cut them in very strange shapes and build them. You can see some of the references there in there, so which I mentioned earlier, anyways. So this whole project is about maybe these civilizations got buried underwater, and this team of scientists are gonna go find it. And who knows what the story of the movie is, but that's my basis for these drawings. So we start with the ship. They go into this kind of very stormy area. They drop this elven type of deep sub in there to explore, and they find this ancient megalith structure under the ocean. So their architecture tend to be very straight. They don't make circular things. They don't make maybe they make circular columns. So most of the structures are pretty much like square-ish based. So they could drill very nice holes and they can make round columns, but the structures tend to be, like I said, rectangular or pyramidal. I believe, for example, the Stonehenge and some of the earlier monolithic stuff is done by even different culture. They're not the ones that build these giant stones. So they like to build Stonehenge and the one in Turkey, right? Göbekli Tepe, whatever they call that, right? The kind of circular ancient thing they found a few years ago. So they have circular things. But anyways, we're going off topic here. So on the monolithic structure here, the establishing shot, I'm making it more rectangular versus, say, a big round pattern. Okay, so here I'm adding 2 more sketches. I felt that I should do some interiors, but I ended up not doing these 2 because these 2 will take the most time. The reason for that is because the exteriors and the interior of the ships were based on reality. And later you see me using using photos directly. But for these things, these interiors of this temple, these things don't exist. We don't have any evidence of this at all. Maybe the king's chamber inside the Grand Pyramid could be an example of that, and the Grand Gallery leading into the king's chamber inside the pyramid, possibly megalithic built. I think personally, I think they were. But other than that, there really isn't any examples of a chamber that's built by the monolithic society. All we have left now are just giant stones, but no interior spaces. So I kind of had to make this stuff up. So I was basing this architecture here on the Grand Gallery. So for those who've been into the pyramids, it's that area where you climb to that little narrow passageway. Once you climb through that, it opens up to this beautiful, very alien-like structure. But by the way, I don't claim that these are built by aliens at all. I'm saying these are probably built by humans, but built in a completely different style. Anyways, in the Grand Gallery, it opens up. It has kind of this upside down step type of building style. And then, of course, through that, you go into the king's chamber. So I'm kind of using those background to build this inner structure. But I ended up not drawing these because the other sketches are going super fast. It took about 20 minutes each to paint out, as you'll see later. But this one, at this point, I was like, you know what? I cannot rush through these. So I ended up not doing it because I only had about a few hours a day to do these design cinemas. So you'll see the other 6 being completed, the ships as well as the exterior of this monolithic culture and the sub in the water. Okay, so if you're following along, I recommend you guys could try this yourself. Pick some kind of subject matter that interests you, right? I always recommend students to draw things that interest you. It could be anything. For me, I like ancient cultures, I like technology, I like NASA and all these kind of things. So I tend to draw in this kind of environments. But if you like, say, like Japanese anime and stuff, it doesn't matter actually. Or you like cartoony things, or you like really dark worlds and Gothic architecture, whatever. Long as you are practicing and you are drawing, you are moving forward in your career. And do this so it becomes your main focus and not a hobby. I mean, if you want to turn this into a job, right? It can't be like, oh, today I feel like chilling today, so I'm going to draw for fun. No, you got to turn this into a day in and day out practice. So even for this, you're watching Design Cinema. These are made up projects. I'm doing these for YouTube, right? I still try to put in really committed time into them, right? During the time I'm doing Design Cinema, nobody bothers me. My office door is closed. I tell everyone in the office like I'm recording, so don't disturb anything. So I take it very seriously. And so if you're practicing, and for me, I already have a job. I'm already in the industry, and I still put all my time into it. So if you're learning, you gotta put way more effort into it than what I'm doing over here. Really give yourself a deadline, give yourself a goal. So maybe you're doing 10 pieces, maybe 5 a day, so you got 10 in 2 days, right? And give yourself a goal of maybe 15 to 20 of these a week. So you're giving yourself real deadlines and not doing these because you have free time. If you're doing that, then this is a hobby. But if you're committing a lot more time onto it, then it could become a career. All right, so I'm taking the rough sketches and adding just really quick value pass on it. So back in the days, I would have been drawing these in a sketchbook, and I just go through it with a marker. So my process hasn't changed much in the last 20-something years. It's all the same. It's just a tool is digital. But it all starts with a rough sketch, put some value on it so I can understand the lighting. This is all for my mind to kind of evolve the design as I'm doing this, because this process here you're looking at here is not hard. It's kind of brainless. It's just putting some values and so forth. So what I'm doing here is depending purely on muscle power to finish this process. Meanwhile, my brain is going through thinking what to actually do for these pieces as I design them out. For example, is a laptop on the table? Do I need a joystick on the table? Are there dangling wires in this room, or is it all high tech? I'm kind of solving that in my head, or I'm doing this kind of brainless work. So I'm reserving, the smarter part of the brain to think about the design, while the dumber side of the brain is doing this kind of manual labor work, which is like just fill things with grade, put a lighting in there and so forth. So even though this process, if you're doing it for yourself, is unnecessary if you think about it, right? If you're just doing a line sketch, why even put value on it? I'm doing this actually to stay in production pipeline so I could think. Because this whole process here doesn't take long. Each piece took maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes tops to put a grade pass on it. So it's super quick. So the whole process here took less than 20 minutes, I think, to do. But that 20 minutes is very important for me not to leave the project, not to go outside and chat with friends and chat with staff and so forth. I stay in the project so I can think this stuff out and write any notes down on the paper. So when I'm coming to the next stage, which you'll see shortly here, I have a pretty good idea of what to do. Okay. So I think this episode, I'm not sure if I'll continue this theme for 98. I'm not sure if I'll build these things out in 3D or not. I'm not too sure. Like maybe this process here will just keep it in the rough stage. But I do want to mention one more time, these are not for clients. Even for the paintings we're about to do, they're not for anybody. They're just for yourself, because you'll see me quickly jump into photos soon. And a few years ago, we were using photos to literally bash the final images together. Concept art, I think about 5 years ago, photo bashing was like all the rage, right? Everyone was doing it. It's like taking photos and bash all these post-apocalyptic scenes together. And it's not too hard to do, and it's very quickly to get the results. But then it gets very interesting, which is, okay, how much of the work did you do when the rest of it was already a nice photo to start with, right? Like if you take a nice, beautifully shot photo and just add a character walking in it, well, it didn't do too much work. Even though in the design process, yes, that does help you, get the idea down. But if you're presenting that as your final image, then that's really debatable how much work you did there. In this case, I'll be using photos too, and you'd be like, hey, Feng, you just said don't use photos to do your designs. But in my case, I'm only using this to get my idea out. The image will not be my final presentation image. The final will be presented in 3D. It will be painted in Photoshop, right? The original image does not show up at all in the final image. In this case, because you're doing your own stuff and you're trying to get the idea down, I'm using photos to speed things up. For example, a deep diving sub like Elvin, right? That sub, or a research ship. There's one called, I believe, like what's it called? It starts with the H. Can't remember called. They're pretty famous research ships, right? They already exist. They're already pretty cool. I'm just going to use them as is. So instead of spending time to draw them perfectly and copy a photograph and try to draw it, which might take you, say, 3 hours to draw the ship, it's useless to do that, right? I could use the photo to stand that in to tell the audience or tell myself I'm going to use the ship. Same thing with Elvin. I don't have to reinvent a deep diving sub that exists. And if this is a film or video game, we'll probably use it as is too. So there's no need to draw it nice. So slapping a photo there is going to save a ton of time, and it's going to get me to the next phase, right? So when I'm building these in 3D, I'll use the photograph as a base. So here I am. I'm about to start this process. Perfect timing. You jump into it. So here I'm going to start the first one, which is the establishing shot with the boat. Or with the ship, that is. So I'm just going to find a photograph that kind of matches my comp, and it's good enough. I don't even care if the composition, if the photograph's perfect or not. All it is going to give me a starting point, which is I need a boat on an ocean with some clouds to establish this kind of mood I'm trying to achieve, and that's the only purpose these will serve. So you guys are watching these being presented. You're like, oh, you're not going to show these, but you're showing in Design Cinema. Yes, because I'm showing you the process that I'm taking to do these. In the real world, these disappears. They don't show up anywhere. They don't show up in client meetings. They don't show up in my portfolio. They don't show up anywhere. They're just a process to get me to the final image. So this photo here will never show up in the final image. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. I'm using bad, quote unquote, bad photo bashing to get an idea out, just like sketching one out on paper. They both serve the same purpose, just is to get something on paper so I know what to do next, right? So if I'm handing this off to 3D, or I'm building this myself, I kind of have an idea what this ship will look like, what the composition is going to be, what the lighting is going to be. So I'm not kind of guessing as I build, which is pretty dangerous if you don't have experience, right? You kind of try and do this all in 3D. If you don't have experience, 3D software is not as fast as what I'm doing here. Like these comps in real time took anywhere from 10 to the longest one. I think I timed at 25 minutes. So this boat one, I think took about 15 or 20 minutes in real time. So they're very quick. To comp this out in 3D this fast is pretty hard, especially if you never have experience in 3D software. So I'd rather comp it out here with some photo bashing. It's really bad, super ugly. There's not much good perspective. but it's good enough for yourself. And I want to mention that multiple times so you guys don't confuse this with, hey, these are final paintings. These are things that are going to show clients. And these are things that, oh, you just took a photograph from the internet and put it together. What's the point of all this, right? The point here is not these photographs. The point is the idea. So if this is a film, we will build this ship in 3D for the final image. We will paint the water out nicely and make the clouds nicer. So then that shot becomes ours. But to get to that point, we need these images to get our brain going. So here I'm putting the waves in, putting that kind of last sunset before the storm hits, right? This boat is in the stormy area. Because I'm trying to create this mood. So this film here, just by this image, we could tell that this is not a happy, cheery, blue sky, Caribbean type of setting. And that's very, very important in the beginning of a project to establish that. Okay, so let's keep going here. So now I'm just painting in some rough lighting here, getting some of the early comps going, put some fog. But these paintings, they don't have to be nice at all. They're all for yourself. So all right, I'm gonna take a quick break here because I don't want my software to crash. Because actually, for the last painting that you will see at the very end, my software actually crashed, so I can only show you the step-by-step in Photoshop layers, but I did not record it because as soon as I clicked save, the whole software crashed. So I'm a little bit scared that this will crash. So let me stop this right here and continue in 1 second here. Be right back. All right, so I'm back. Ooh, that's saved, so I know that just in case it crashes, we're not that bad. Okay, so let's continue the ship. So you can see I put some highlights and put some details in here, but all this stuff, it doesn't really matter. Even during this stage, I'm thinking about my next image, you know? So right now I'm doing some brainless work, like some painting some lights in and so forth. I'm thinking, okay, what's the next scene, the bridge? How am I gonna light that, you know? So my brain is always a little bit, about 10 minutes ahead of what I'm doing currently, especially when you get to the brain dead area here, which is like, it's not that much hard work now. I'm just adjusting some finer details, some highlights and so forth. So use the smart part of your brain to start figuring out the next scene. And this goes back to the earlier thing when I made a list, right? If I didn't have a list, I'll be wasting a lot of time thinking about what to do next, right? Kind of figure it out. And then that gets really, at least for myself, I don't like to work in that mode in which I don't know what I'm doing next. So I kind of like to plan everything out in advance. So with that list that you see on the left here, I'm always aware of what I'm doing. And on top of the list, I make comps, right? And with these comps, now I'm doing these color keys. So the whole pipeline is just being evolved and refined as I go forward. So I'm not starting with the final image. And these are something I see students do quite a bit, which is their first image, they want to become the final. And if you don't have experience, man, you could get in trouble very, very quickly because, for example, you're like, oh man, this idea is actually not that good, but I already committed, 5 hours into this image. And now you fall into a really huge trap, which is that time sink trap. What I mean by that is because you spend so much time on something, you don't want to now give it up. Now you want to continue, but this image wasn't good in the first place to start with. Like you should have abandoned this maybe 20 minutes ago, but you committed 5 hours into it. So now you're like, you know what, I'm 5 hours in it. Let's just try to finish it. So the whole time, the rest of the time, you're trying to save this image versus actually just making it look good. And this happens to a lot of students in which, they're just trying to save this image the entire time. They're not liking it. They don't like this image at all, but they committed too much time. So my advice is always plan your things early. What do you want to do? What are these shots? What set are you going to do? What kind of references do you have? Everything you're seeing here on screen. Then as you go forward, you have a pretty good idea of what you're doing. And also because I'm doing multiple images, you could kill off a few and it doesn't matter. If you're only working on one, you kill this image off, you have nothing else to work on. And it's very depressing, mentally. You're like, oh man, I just threw away 5 hours of work. I have nothing else to go back on. Here, each comp is taking 20 minutes to do. So by the time, lunch comes around, essentially, 4 hours later, you already have a bunch of comps and you can throw half of them away. You still got 3 of them or 4 of them left. So this is something I've been doing for years for my own pipeline, which is always working a kind of a nice pipeline flow. All right, so here I'm starting the bridge. First is to get a photo bash in there, a quick bridge that looks kind of like my comps, good enough. And through a few right side images, like a wall in there. And now I'm just kind of masking out the windows really quick so I could throw a rainstorm back in there, right? So we stay consistent. So these kind of things I mentioned in the last episode. If you're doing a portfolio for yourself, I generally recommend at least 3 images per set. So that way you can show the art directors or whoever's hiring you that you can stay consistent in terms of lighting, mood, design language, styling, and so forth and so forth. Because if you only have one, it's very hard for them to make a decision on how to make this image, right? It could have just been luck, somebody could have helped you and so forth. But if you have anything more than three, it becomes a set. And a set generally takes some kind of planning to put together. You cannot do it out of luck, right? So here I'm gonna end up doing actually 6 images for this set. And I recommend you do at least 3, right? And you could give this a try. You could do a research ship project as well. Maybe they find I don't know, a lost ship underneath or something, or a big giant carrier, right? It doesn't matter. It's all to practice. And this whole point here is to use real world things to help your portfolio. So you don't have to design a mega starship and a sci-fi thing in space, or design your own, made up thing. Just use real world. And this bridge right here, if we model that in 3D, change it up a little bit, like add some laptops, make the ceiling a little bit cooler, so you could combine maybe 2-3 different things together, all from the real world, you're good to go. And this stuff is exactly how we do in the real world. A lot of these films, very few films requires you to design everything, right? And very few games require to do that kind of stuff. 10%, right? Just keep that in mind. 10%, change 10% of what it is in reality, you're good to go. So like the boat up there, the boat's the same, right? But the photo was the boat in a perfectly nice blue sky. So what do we change? Okay, I add a little bit of antenna on top. That's like 3% change. We'll put it on a stormy sea, which is hard to find photos of a research ship in that kind of condition. We added a perfect stormy sunset. That's our 10%. And that becomes the styling for this scene, right? And then we'll continue that styling as we go into the bridge here. And that's good enough. And these are perfectly fine for portfolios, because there are so many projects that could use this type of design passes, right? You're probably as a student thinking, but I'm not designing anything here. This is all realistic stuff. This ship exists. Why would someone hire me to do this? The reason why is because these images you're seeing here, they don't exist on Google. You could find them individually. You could find storms, you could find ships, you could find the bridge, right? But they don't exist in this context, which has this perfect lighting that you want, this color washing that you want, the story that you're trying to tell. They don't exist in this sequence. So concept designers are hired to do this, right? So yes, these are not designing per se your own thing, but they are designing. Design doesn't mean that what you draw on paper has to be born out of your mind. Design could be simply combining things in a certain way to make it your own, right? Or make it tell this story. So again, we go back to video games like Red Dead Redemption, or go to video games like Far Cry and all these real world games, right? There's a ton of concept artists working on these, right? If you use the argument of, well, anything that exists doesn't need concept designers, then these studios will not hire any concept artists, but in fact, they have tons of them. So, and this is something that's hard for students, I think, especially if they've never done design before, to understand, because I have that problem sometimes teaching junior students, because they think everything they do have to be from scratch. Everything design have to be made up. Everything they draw has to be like, I have to make this ship up, I have to make this bridge up, I have to make the chair up, the laptop. And my answer to that, or question back to the students, like, how many years have you spent designing maritime ships? How many years have you spent designing the bridge of a maritime ship for cargo ships or research ships? How many years have you spent designing laptops, right? How many years do you have designing consoles to control a ship? The kids generally say 19, 21 years old. The answer is going to be 0. They never done any of it. And that's why the results in most cases are not good at all. It just looks like badly designed by someone with no experience. So if you're experienced, you have 20 something years, I trust that most designers could come up with a bridge that looks very believable. They could probably design a ship that looks very believable, but that's born out of 20 to 30 years experience. So, and then those people, they don't need these tutorials. They don't need to be building a portfolio, right? So right now you're watching this probably because you want to build your own portfolio. So I advise you to have some kind of grounded stuff in your portfolio, just to show us art directors that you could adopt to real world. And believe me, I hope you guys believe me. We put so many students in AAA studios at this time that we're doing something right here. If we're teaching our students just to draw crazy stuff all the time, then I bet many of them will not have jobs, right? So it is all coming from experience, also working in the industry, working with so many different projects and directors and so forth, that especially going forward in the next few years, 5 to 10 years, there's going to be even more of these kind of projects on the market, more stuff taking place in the real world. And I could get into a whole talk about why that is, but maybe we'll do it in the next episode. But it has to do with budget and creativity and the outsourcing of studios and so forth. Basically, real world stuff is a little bit easier to control than a complete made up world. And easier to control means a little bit less risk, so you can stay on deadline and so forth. But anyways, let's not get into that topic. It's pretty complex. Just trust me, there's gonna be a lot more real world type of films and video games and so forth in the coming many years. So have some of that in your portfolio, right? And it doesn't mean you don't get to draw fun stuff. Draw fun stuff all you want. I'm just saying, have some of these pieces in your portfolio. Okay, so now moving to the next shot. You can see on the left, I did the comp for it, which is a little Elven sub being told to get ready to be dumped into the ocean, right? So I put the little Elven there, cut out everything off. So for the final, these are things in which we could replace this sub with any sub. We could replace with our own design. We could replace it with some other deep diving subs. The point here with these key shots is to tell yourself what this shot is about. So I'm doing the final version of these. We could totally take these subs out. We could change it to whole other design. You can make your own if you want, if that's the case. But you could also just leave it as Elven. That's fine too. Because again, nobody sees these except for yourself. So just put something on paper. Again, going back to teaching students, sometimes we get a lot of hand waving. It's like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do this, I want to do that. But it's like, that's fine. You could do all of that, but put something on paper. Let's see what it looks like. And that's what you're looking at here. This is my brain on paper right now, just my thought process on paper. So they're not very well done. They're kind of crappy. They're all loose because I'm just trying to move the project forward. All right. So about how many hours? We're about 30 minutes into this video. So about maybe 10 minutes left to do the rest of it. So in total, I completed about 6 comps. So 4 on the ship related and 2 dealing with the water. So actually only 1 really dealing with the water, even the one the sub diving in the water. But that's good enough for one day's work. In my pipeline, that generally is about good. I do about in general about 6 comps a day I'm not in meetings and so forth. So for yourself, again, if you're a student, slow this stuff down. Give yourself maybe 2-3 days to do this and gradually increase the time. Or don't even increase the time. The time will come naturally. Give yourself a heavier deadline delivery. Okay, what I mean by that is don't just try to do 1 image. Give yourself at least 3 and try to complete it in say 2 days, and do that for a few weeks. Now naturally you'll probably get faster. Don't force the speed, force the workload, because then that will force you to actually do things within a certain amount of time. So learning, if you don't give yourself deadlines and kind of just learning whenever you feel like it, your progress is going to be pretty slow. So by giving yourself a deadline of 3 images in 2 days or 1 day or 3 days, whatever your pace is, then really try to meet that goal. What I mean by that is don't procrastinate. If you're giving yourself 3 days or 2 days to do 3 images and you're on day 2 and you're only on 1 image, well, you got to do something to get the other 2 images done. Even if they're crappy, get them done. Even if they're the worst drawing ever, get them done. Because you got to start practicing giving yourself a real world workflow, a pipeline. Therefore, you can start learning about how this works. Because drawing is just a small part of our industry. We are essentially all business people, right? We're selling the idea in our head to somebody, right? Think about that, right? These things don't exist. Even though these are research ships, they exist, but these things don't exist. And someone's paying you to put that together. So you are selling a product. So if you're selling a product, you have to think in production terms of getting these done on time, that you don't procrastinate and tell clients like, oh, I didn't finish it, even though they wanted 6 images, you have none, right? That's not going to work. So use this time to practice all of it. So practicing thinking, practicing comps, practicing real world things, practicing deadlines, right? All these things come together. You do this for a year, I guarantee you'll be much better off than you were a year ago. But you have to learn with the pipeline process. Don't do it as a hobby, okay? All right, so here's a little Elven sub. I actually ended up not really liking this piece that much, but it'll do for now. These are things that on a real project, I'll probably go back and recomp it. The reason why I don't like it is because most of these subs are dropped off on the side of the ship or on the back of the ship. So this one looks kind of weird. Like the position of the sub is not exactly correct, I think, from a compositional point. So I was struggling a little bit with this piece, but I was like, you know what, it's a comp, it's good enough. If I'm moving to 3D with these, I'll fix it on the 3D side. But at least in terms of lighting and the overall position the sub where the camera is at, I'm okay with that. So I decided to just go ahead and continue the image from there. So let me take another quick break real quick, just in case this thing crashes. Okay, so we're continuing here with the little Elven sub being hung off the side of a boat or a ship, ready to get dropped off. So yeah, 98. I'm not sure if I'll finish these. Depends on some of the time my staff has as well to help me with some of the 3D stuff. So if we're really busy, I don't think I can finish this. So 98, maybe we'll move on to maybe I was trying to do that windmill town. So for those who haven't seen 95, you can go back and watch it. 95, I mentioned a bunch of different design things. So we went through about half of them already. Like we did the dam town, right? The mining one. We just did the Japanese kind of in the canyon one. We did the Shanghai without changing, just retelling history. Now we did this research sub. So we went through about half of those. So I think I'll do maybe the European town being powered by windmill or something. Or maybe the overpopulation one with the city with no windows. That could be kind of cool for 98. So we'll see. I'm not too sure. So but at least this one hopefully give me guys a good idea of the production pipeline. So yeah, I do these day in and day out. Most of the time these are done for my artists, for my designers, my team, right? So we could get a project scoped out very, very early on and go into production very, very quickly. So and these are things that took a long time to perfect, right? When I was much younger, like 20 something years old, this process would take me a long time to perfect, because every single project I was kind of afraid of it going into it. Even though school has taught me quite well into producing work, the hardest part was balancing the time, right? Because school, they generally give you way more time than the real industry gives you, because generally, for example, an entertainment project would be all term. So you have like 14 weeks to put together an entertainment project. And at the end of the 14 weeks, you really only have a handful of really well done images, right? That's a long time for projects. In the real world, that thing could be as fast as 1 week, that you have to go from nothing into something presentable to a client in just in the span of 1 week. So in the beginning of my career, I was really bad at managing like what's step one, what's step two, what's step three. So what you're looking at here is just all these years combined of the workflow I find most efficient, right? And you don't have to use this workflow. This is just my workflow. So my workflow hasn't changed at all, which is just being perfected, but it hasn't changed much at all. Now I know how to control each step. For example, how long I spend on doing notes, how long I spend doing reference images. And we could talk about that right now really quick, since all these are going to be repeats. So for myself, doing research images, I tend to not to go over a few hours, because after a few hours, you're starting to burn into serious production time, right? I think you're generally 1 to 2 hours looking for images on the internet for this project is good enough, especially nowadays. Like back in the days, it was much harder. Even 5 years ago, it was much harder because Google image search wasn't as advanced, right? I remember back in the days, Google image searchers just give you a bunch of like vacation photos and so forth, like really bad, low resolution things. Nowadays, it finds almost anything. So that has dramatically reduced the amount of time it takes to find things. And you can pretty much find anything if you know how to search correctly, right? So in this case, like subs and monolithic architecture and so forth, really easy to find. Flickr is another good one, Pinterest and so forth, right? So I generally limit myself to about maybe 2-3 hours at most. So it's on a Monday, I come in 10 a.m., have some coffee, do a meeting. So from like 11 to maybe 3 in the afternoon, I'm done with all the references. And then the next one is to do some notes. My notes generally take about 10-20 minutes to write everything down in my head. So now we're moving into the rough sketch. And the rough sketch, 5 to 10 minutes each. So the ones you saw over there, the whole thing took like less than 20 minutes to put together. So it's pretty quick. And then once we have that, we go into these comps, and these take about 20 minutes or so per each. So I'm not exaggerating here. I have the timeline right here as I'm recording the audio. The real time here is about 2 hours and 40 minutes for this whole entire process. So it's fairly quick. But again, I do have to mention, as a student, don't try to compete with someone with experience. Do it at your own time. However, meet the deadline. That's the thing you have to stress about. Don't procrastinate and don't miss your deadline. So give yourself plenty of time, like 2 days, 3 days, but meet the delivery on that day, no matter what it takes. That's what you're trying to train, and you'll get faster naturally. The worst thing to do is procrastinate. And we've seen, back to our own students at the school, is that procrastination kills your career, because yes, you can have fun doing other things, and you could kind of talk yourself out of anything. It's like, oh, I'm watching YouTube and that's reference. No, it's not. You know what I'm saying? Not when you're a student. For professionals watching a YouTube video, they're probably learning quite a bit that can apply to their work, because they already got the fundamentals down. They already got the designs down. They know how to do composition. They know how to do lighting. So when they watch something on like monolithic architecture, they could apply to that work the next day. But for a student, you have so much more you got to learn. Time management, all the things I just mentioned earlier, comms and doing good perspective, and how to do good lighting, how to do cinematography, blah, blah, blah. There's like a ton of stuff. So if you only just watch things and don't actually do it, it's pretty useless. you, as a student, the hardest part right now is to actually do the work. So don't procrastinate and try to tell yourself that you are learning by just looking at other people's tutorials or attending talks and all these kind of things a student typically needs to do. You still gotta go and sit in front of your computer and produce work and produce a consistent amount of work on a weekly basis. Then you will get better. Right? You take one student that doesn't look at any YouTube videos, that doesn't go to any art conventions, doesn't do anything. All they do is on a weekly basis, they're producing work. That person will be probably 100 times better than somebody else who doesn't do much at all, but they are watching every single tutorial on the internet. They are attending every art conference around the country, right? They're going to everything, and they're meeting all the, say, famous concept artists and so forth. But in the entire year, they produce, let's just put it realistic, maybe produce 10 pieces, right? That's it. The other person in the meantime produced probably maybe 200 pieces. That difference is massive. The other person is going to get much, much better, much faster, and they're probably going to start working within a year or two in the industry. The other one, they could be doing this for years and still become a hobby for them because they're not taking the hard, they're skipping the hardest part, which is doing the work, right? And I know doing this kind of stuff is stressful. You mess up and the images are ugly and you don't like what you're doing and so forth. But as part of the course, the reason why I'm showing you guys all these rough sketches right now is don't be embarrassed by this, right? I'm showing you guys these horrible photo bash images, man. Look how bad these are, man. Like really badly painted, and they're not perfect at all. But that's fine. This is part of the creative process. Don't be embarrassed by it. You might take you failing 10 images to get to that one image. That's all part of it. But if you don't start with any images, you're never gonna get to that nice image, right? You cannot start every image and go, okay, this image, that's it. This is going to be my good image, So it doesn't work that way. You have to be like, okay, I'm going to do 10 images and maybe one of them will be good, okay? So here I am real quick, jump back to what you see on screen here. I just did the diving one here. So now I'm going to do the control room, which is the ROV. So nothing really needs to be designed here. All I want to do is make these rooms a little bit bigger. That's it. So I took a comp here of a smaller room, which I like the foreground element. And I kind of comp in a kind of further away one, and that's it, and just light it the same as the other pieces, and we got our ROV room. Okay, so and I want to put a little small door or some kind of area there that allowed light in, and that was planned in the sketch phase. Okay, let me drink some water here. I haven't drank water in the last 40 minutes. Okay, so back on teaching yourself this kind of stuff. So stay on target. Oops, just hit the mic, sorry about that. Stay on target, meet deadlines, and don't worry about failures. This is something that I wish all students would take to heart when you're learning. Doing ugly drawings and doing crappy stuff and failing at something is all part of the course. We all went through it. You cannot believe that every image you do is going to end up as a final image somewhere. And also, don't believe every image you're doing it for the goal of posting on Facebook or on Twitter for someone else to see. This is for yourself, So because I do know students who get to a halfway point, they think this sucks, they just give up. They're like, oh man, this is not good. Now I cannot share on Facebook. I did this for nothing. It's like the whole goal of it is wrong. It's like your goal was to just finish this to share to your friends. How about doing this to learn? So what, you failed. You spent 3 hours failing at something, but that's still 3 hours you spent doing it. So you learned something from it, even if the image is ugly. Okay, now do another one, right? And maybe another one you spent 3 hours and it looks ugly and you failed at it. Great, now you got 6 hours in there, right? Now do another 3 hours. Now I got 9 hours of failing. But 9 hours of failing is not failing. 9 hours, you took away probably some very, very valuable information from that. So the images, yes, they turn out crappy and they're not usable. They're not for your portfolio and you cannot show it to Facebook and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. You gain something from it. Now maybe your fourth piece, they spend 3 hours, something happens, right? That image now is starting to look kind of good. Probably still pretty crappy, not going to go in your portfolio, but now you're like, oh, I'm learning something from this. So that's the attitude I'm trying to teach at our school here. I'm trying to instill that in, even my designers I work with, which is don't do everything thinking that the first time that you do it is going to be the one, and that kills a lot of students when they have that mode. We could see students generally give up sometimes, right? They start a project, they have all these great imagination in their head, and then halfway through they don't like what they're doing and just give up. Like, no more homework, I don't want to do this no more, because this is too hard, and then that you see other students, they go through these struggles and they make things that are not so good, but they keep it up and eventually they succeed. Okay. All right, so back to here. So you can see I added a little, it's not even a door. It's kind of like maybe a hole in the wall, like a a hallway. You can see a portal on the other side of it. So who knows? These are things I could solve in 3D. That's not too hard. This room is not very hard to build in 3D as well. So as long as I have the general idea and the overall composition, I'm good, right? So because there's not much imagination here, just build it as is, okay? So the reason why I put a big screen in front is because if this is a film or a AAA game, we need a pretty big screen to show the audience what we're looking at. So a tiny screen is going to give the director some limited usage of this environment. So he has to get the camera really close to show that, and we cannot show, for example, a big crowd. But again, it's subjective. It's depending on what they want to achieve. So here I'm just making it very easy, so we can have like say 4 or 5 people behind the screen. So the director could still capture the crowd and still capture what we see on screen. But again, it's not always this case. You could actually have a small screen and people crowd around it. Maybe that's better for certain scenes. But in this one, I just want to create a giant screen to show off. Later, we'll do the underwater and we'll comp it back into the screen. So right now, I'm just kind of doing a blank blue screen here. So we'll comp in our underwater scene into it when we finish that scene. Okay. Also add a couple of lights to give us some perspective there. So this room has some depth to it. So when doing indoor shots, I always want to put some shapes or forms that give us a free perspective. For example, the bridge, you see the ceiling, I put a couple of lines in there as well. So it makes the scene feel more 3D. And these are also reminders that if I go to build these in 3D, that I don't leave these things out. Okay, so this pretty much finishes all the ship interior. So the only thing I've left right now is the underwater establishing. But like I said, unfortunately, I record the whole thing, and boom, when I click save, it crashed my entire recording software, like Camtasia. So I don't have it, but luckily I saved it PSD, so I can show you guys the breakdown of that in a second here. So I'm coming to an end here. So yeah, I think we've got maybe 5 more minutes left on this video. I'm sorry that I didn't record this in real time because, again, it takes a long time to do that kind of stuff. If it's like 3 hours, I think it'll bore you guys as well. So this time I decided to speed it up a bit and just do an audio pass on top. To take away from this is, if I had to summarize this entire video, which is plan things out, give yourself a deadline, and do comps as rough as you want. Don't make your sketches nice, and you can do really bad photo bash to get the idea across. These photo bashing is not used for the final image. Nobody sees these. You don't even have to make the perspective good. Like in these, because I've been doing this for quite a while, I can make the perspective kind of good, but that doesn't even matter. All it matters here is to get the idea on paper, because the final will clean it up in 3D and that'll solve our fundamental issues, right? The point I'm trying to capture with these is to get the idea down. So learn to work in that mode, which is just do things to make the project moving forward, right? Oh, here's the underwater one you can see here, right? So this one, I put a pyramid. It's a little cheesy. I actually didn't have a pyramid in my comp, but when I was doing this, I go, maybe I'll put it in. It's kind of cool. So you can see the monolithic structures coming in here, a little sub looking at it, all the layers, but unfortunately it didn't get recorded. But anyways, here they are. All of them are opened up here for you guys to see. Comp them all into a single image here. So then that way later on, if I'm looking at these to do the finals, I don't have to open each one and kind of place them around in Photoshop. So this is my own way of just organizing things. Just put on a single composition and make it big, throw on the second screen, and then work towards the final. So these images, even though they're color and they have things on top, they're not for anyone, right? I think I mentioned that about 10 times now. Just for yourself. So learn to work in this mode, produce things for yourself to move forward. Okay, so I'm gonna show you guys this in a full screen mode, and this video pretty much come to an end. So you find this on our website, on our YouTube. I'll put the image on my Facebook as well. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in episode 98. This is Feng Zhu signing off. Bye-bye.